Okay, guys. Let me introduce to you Tim King here. He wants to speak to us about veterans issues. He's our main speaker. Tim King.
Thank you very much. I'm a former Marine. I served in the early 1980s. As a reporter and photographer, I worked in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So I run a group called SalemNews.com. There's a dash between Salem and News. We concentrate on post-traumatic stress disorder and different diseases that are faced by veterans. And I've been doing this for 9 years, really seriously. And I work with a gentleman named Dr. Philip Levesque, who is a PTSD doctor. So we have some out-of-the-box type approaches that are coming into a documentary that I'm also shooting. I'm from California. I've been on the road for 8 weeks, about 9,000 miles, going around doing these talks about veterans' health issues. It begins with my service in El Toro, Marine Corps Air Station El Toro in Southern California. Most of you, I'm sure, know about the toxic water at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. It's one of the only instances like that where the government and the military has actually come forth and admitted that these problems exist. They're causing cancer, they're causing many difficulties for veterans. In fact, I've heard the number 10 million for the number of people affected and impacted by Camp Lejeune. When you're talking about dirty water on a base, you're talking about veterans being sick, you're also talking about their families, and you're also talking about the civilians who live in the outlying areas. At El Toro, there's a 6-mile-long plume of TCE, trichloroethylene, and I like to think that people know what that is, but I'd say that 90% of Americans don't know what TCE is, and I believe it's a product that was used at every single military base that we've got. We have 130 military bases that are on the EPA Superfund list, and again, this is something that people just tend to not understand because the media, largely not comprised of veterans, doesn't relate this information to people, and when they do, they don't necessarily do it well. I have many friends who have died from cancer. I was a peacetime Marine. I shouldn't have to say those things together. It shouldn't be that way. We know that the different wars, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, they have this whole host of problems that go with that. Agent Orange is another subject that I've been discussing on the strip. My coordinator, her name is Cherie Evans. She's in Missouri. Her husband was a Marine in Vietnam, and he died of glioblastoma from Agent Orange. Together, we worked together, and Cherie has created I don't know how to say it properly, but the VA now partially recognizes glio as an Agent Orange problem. So she's made some progress on that. And I've been going around doing these talks. I've been all the way as far as New York, and I'll be back in Sacramento in a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to do this again next year. TCE was originally created, believe it or not, to be a replacement for chloroform. It was not created to be a parts cleaner for jet aircraft, which it was used for at El Toro. It was created to put people under. And what they've learned is that it causes liver failure. Most people can be put under one time with TCE, and if they get contact a second time, they'll die. When I was a Marine, I had lower stomach problems all the time. And I had 2 sons that were born while I served at El Toro. Both of them, one had a collapsed bowel at the age of 4 months. We didn't know why at the time. He nearly died. And the other son was born with an epiglottis the size of a 40-year-old man's. And they both had to have major surgery under the age of 6 months. And 20 years later, as a reporter, I started discovering the truth and the reason, which is the TCE contamination at El Toro. But remember that TCE is only one of the chemicals that we're dealing with. PCE, perchloroethylene, tetrachloroethylene. By the way, TCE is a triple chlorine degreaser. That's what the basis of it is. At El Toro, they would clean the discharge of the F4s and the A4s after they flew, and then it would just be dumped into the ground grates. And this isn't really the fault of the Marines or anybody like that. It's the fault of the DOD for not telling the military that these products were so harmful to their health. Most of them were made by Dow Chemical, and of course we know about Monsanto and Agent Orange and all of this. And all these companies go on and on and on with such little responsibility to the people who have been impacted by the diseases that they cause. I want to stress that I have about 15 minutes to talk. If any of you have any questions, you can find me, Tim King, at salem-news.com. You can go to the staff page and I'm there. I have a host of people who can help with problems ranging from PTSD to these different chemical contaminants. We've worked on the hexavalent chromium contamination that was suffered by different soldiers in Iraq after they went and relieved some contractors who had been watching the site where all this powder was, and the contractors knew what it was, so they were protecting themselves from it. But when the U.S. Army came in, they weren't advised. So a lot of people are sick from that. And these are just, among the many examples of illnesses that people are facing today, that I believe that if we can get out and get the word out, that we can at least alert people so that they can, if you're a veteran, you can go to the VA, perhaps file a claim. And there are claims going through. El Toro, there are Agent Orange claims that are going through for people that served in El Toro during the Vietnam War who never deployed because they were handling the Agent Orange and they were loading the aircraft with it. I'm sure most of you know that the sailors who were working on that whole side of the Agent Orange thing during Vietnam, they're not getting any compensation for it. Neither are the Air Force personnel who were in Thailand that were setting missions out over Vietnam. So it's shameful to me that our government has let people go into this spot. And my book is called Betrayal, and it's about the contamination of these bases, and it's about the cover-up, and it's also about continued narco-trafficking that went well into the 1990s. That we like to think that ended with Iran-Contra in '85, and it didn't. And so one of the subjects in my book is the murder of a Marine colonel in El Toro. Happened in 1999, 1990. He was advised in 1990 by a flight sergeant who worked at night that aircraft were still coming in with cargoes of drugs. They were offloading them. So we've been working on this one for years and years, and it's a really compelling story, and there is a documentary coming forth on that. Again, I've been able to get footage for my documentary. One of the big things that we talk about, Dr. Levesque in particular, is that it's wrong for the VA to default and prescribe psychotropic addictive drugs to those who suffer PTSD. For some people, that is an answer, but for many, it's not, because it can turn a person into a vegetable. It's not fair. And there are many therapies that are going on that are working. I don't know how many of you know about cortisol, but cortisol is a chemical that's released along with adrenaline in your brain when you're in a combat environment or any heavily stressful environment where you're threatened. Cortisol is what allows you to survive. It's probably why a lot of people are here today. But the receptor that the cortisol flows through stays open once it's open. And this is something that the government's known for a lot of years. Meditation and different therapies that are very simple and don't involve any drugs can really put these things back on the other track. So again, if any of you have any questions at any point, I hope that you'll go to salem-news.com and just read the stories that we have about veterans, because they're so widespread. And it's a real shame that I have to be out doing this right now, or that anyone has to suffer the way they are. Do I have any questions right now, anyone? Please.
What are the effects of carbon tetrachloride? When I was in the Navy, we used that thing freely to feed equipment. What do you expect out of it? I mean, what are the effects?
I would say that, cancer is going to be the biggest effect. It's something, I don't want to present myself as an expert in certain things, but I would like to, I'll take that information, and if you don't mind, I'll give you my card and let's follow up and I'll get you answers on that. But all of these chemicals, they weren't designed for people to be around them closely. And then, with TCE, I'm sure it's the same thing. It was just handled, rapidly. And it's the contact with your skin, and it's the breathing, and all of these different things. Today, Marine Corps Air Station El Toro is slated to become a housing community. And I think that our stories that we've been doing for the last, since about 2006, have really put a damper on that. Lennar Homes is #2 biggest home builder in America. They like to buy these contaminated sites because they're very cheap, and they turn them into housing communities. And let me give you some perspective on TCE. Mountain View, California is right by Moffett Field, the huge Navy base. It's closed down now. That is an EPA Superfund site for TCE. Google has their biggest headquarters. It's called the Googleplex right there, adjacent to Moffett Field. They bought land that is sitting on top of 3 other EPA Superfund sites. They were semiconductor manufacturers. They had a great big tank of TCE that sat there and leached into the ground for decades. Google came and bought that property cheap, knowing that it was contaminated. They put in sensors in the wall so that if the TCE was permeating the building, that alarms would go off. Well, the alarms have been going off. So I was in San Francisco recently, and there was a whole team of Google employees there for a parade. And I went up and I began talking to them, and you know what? They're not being advised. No one's telling them that they're living and working in this heavily contaminated area. A few of them know, but I think that the vast majority are being treated just like we were. They're being told to use the chemicals, let me reverse that. We were told to use the chemicals. They're not doing that, they're just working in the same environment, but the government needs to make them aware. And Google, their motto, what was it? Do no evil? That was what their motto used to be. And I just find that very sad today that okay, so Mountain View, California's state acceptance levels for TCE in the water, 5 parts per billion. What El Toro reads up at is about 8,000 parts per billion. It's pretty bad. When you go to Mountain View, the EPA's recent testing there, 160,000 parts per billion, and that's where the Googleplex is located. So the problems, again, they affect all of us. I think that Moffett Field is largely responsible for that with the semiconductor manufacturers too. So anyway, again, I stress, any of you who have questions, please, I'll be hanging around here for a while also, so if anyone wants to ask any questions, come get my card or give me your information so that I can follow up with you. I'll be very glad to do that. If you are interested in my book, it's co-authored by Robert O'Dowd. Bob was a Marine at El Toro exactly 20 years before I was. And I'll tell you, on my team at Salem News, we have 118 writers. I won't say most are veterans, but a large number of them are. We have 18 former Marines, well, 2 are still in the Marine Corps that write for us. Of those of us who are at El Toro, there are 5 of us. I'm the only one of the 5 who's not a cancer survivor, and they've all survived cancer at least twice. So this just keeps going on. Awareness is everything, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be here.